Hi and welcome. If you could settle down. I'm Gunnar Mein, and I'd like to welcome you to the first meeting of the Performance Experts Group, a panel discussion today. I manage the Technical Community Network, which is an effort in the Office of David Vaskovich to connect the technical community, the senior technical community, a little more than it has been in the past. A couple of years ago, actually, one of our new recruits from our strategic recruiting team came to us and said, hey, listen, we want to get the security people in the company together. Would you guys organize a room and get us some food and stuff? And they've been meeting ever since, and they found that very valuable. Security is one of the obvious things that span the whole company. Performance is another one. And so when Gerardo came to us and said, hey, could you help me spin something up to really discuss performance across the company, we're all over that, and you will see more of these efforts from us in the future. And with no further ado, I'd like to introduce the Director of Performance Engineering for Developer Division, Gerardo Bermudez.
Thanks. This is the guy who offered me my first full-time performance job in the CLR team, so it's all his fault. So a few things quickly, and then some housekeeping, and then we go. About a year ago, we created the performance engineering team, the developer division, to enable people to meet their performance goals, and that's one of the key reasons why we're here. We believe that performance is not something that just performance people do, but everyone should do. And we talk about the friends of performance, people who do not work on performance full-time, but who get performance, people who get it, people like you. So one of the key things that we want to do here, beyond getting perf people together and talk about perf horror stories and all that, which we like to do, we want to build connections with the friends of performance and grow the friends of performance circle. So this is not just about perf people, it's about everyone else as well. I actually started working on performance about 5 or 4.5 years ago when I was in the Avalon team. And since the beginning, I've been studying, analyzing, copying, cloning, emulating, what have you, performance experts around the company, and I recommend you do that. You find out what works, and you customize it to your environment, and you embrace it, you extend it, and then you share it back. And that's another key reason why we're here, because even though it's true that we have client versus server and infrastructure versus applications and product versus services, we also have a lot of common problems. We all seem to have this lack of performance culture, and we share tools and infrastructure, counter, CTW, and we can share more engineering practices. So this is about finding the common ground without denying the different challenges that we have, but there is a lot of common things that we can look at and drive, and that's another important reason. And the last one, in my opinion, just the networking of this thing, it makes it worth it. Right? But we need to aim much higher than that. I think the company is expecting us to lead in this space. The company needs us to lead in this space. And so more than the networking, it's about leadership. And, there is no magic sauce or it's not rocket science either. Right? If we manage to align, right, not necessarily to agree, but if we align behind common targets and we kind of talk a similar talk and walk a similar walk, that will put us in a leadership position. So it's in theory pretty simple to do, so let's just do it. So housekeeping, we created an alias, and we'll send you mail. We'll send you the alias of the advisory council, which is a group of folks that have been working on putting this together. We'll send you a link to a website with more information, including the proposal for events. We have about a year worth of ideas. We're going to be refining those with your feedback, which is an important part of this. We do have the next one already scheduled, because we need to plan ahead for July 27th, on multi-core. So we'll have another interesting discussion here about that. The rest will shape us as we go. There is food and alcohol over there. We have the room after 4, and so you guys please do that. And I think I got them all. I want to thank Jim Icahn here for helping us with the logistics and the support and all that kind of stuff. And with that, I give it to my boss's boss on my first performance job.
All right, I'm David Trevor. Thanks, Gerardo. So I'm Dave Turtle. I'll be playing the role of manager. management overhead today amongst my esteemed colleagues who are. I'm told I'm effective at the management overhead role. The goal of today is, as Gerardo said, really to share networking and information about performance. And one thing I'd very much like to encourage is that the discussions be as interactive as possible. I have some seed questions that I'm going to direct to each of the panelists. I expect that they will be answering those questions, but robustly discussing amongst themselves, and we'd love to have interaction from you all as well. In order to prevent it from going too crazy, we basically have 2 microphones. The panelists get one, and Jim in the back has a microphone, so if you have a comment that you're passionate about, please raise your hand and Jim will come by. We are recording the event, so in order to show up on the recording, you need to be speaking into the microphone. Let's see. Actually, I have a thing I want to do. I want to get a sense of the kinds of people who are here today. So first of all, if your main job is performance, who's like your primary role in your job is working on performance? About half. That's cool because I expected actually more. That's cool to hear the non-perf people here as well. So in terms of areas where you work, who's in the Windows areas? Okay. Office? Cool. E&D? Anybody from E&D? Oh, over there, okay. DevDiv? My old division is well represented. Anybody from the online areas? I should raise my hand too. Good. Good to see you. All right, I guess I have some work to do in the live areas to get more performance awareness and interest, but I'll be able to do that over time. All right, with that, I'd like to give the panelists each 60 seconds to introduce themselves, and then we'll dive into the questions. Dave, why don't you start us off?
I'm Dave Campbell with the SQL Group. I've been with SQL for 12 years and have been, like others here, been for a time, fighting with performance for quite a while. And the thing that strikes me, I guess probably strikes all of us with gray hair, is how hard it has become to be a systems programmer mindful of performance nowadays. So it's one of those things where I think our job in that regard is more complex and more difficult than it was 20 years ago when I used to work on a VAX and it was just a matter of counting instructions and you were done. So that's what I've got to add.
I'm Mike Fortin. I work in the Windows division. I run the client performance team. This is year 19 for me working in performance. Started in grad school, did 5 years at IBM, operating systems performance there, and 9 years here working in Windows. I would agree with Dave that it is much more difficult now to do performance across the board than it was years ago. It used to be pretty straightforward, pretty simple. You look at a handful of things and things would work out. It's very complicated now, and I think it's very difficult for developers all across Microsoft to figure out what the right set of trade-offs are. They don't know who to ask. When they do ask, they fear that their questions might be taken as stupid or ridiculous, and they'll be laughed at. And as a result, they generally don't ask, and they go off and build something that then is stupid and ridiculous.
And then they're laughed at even more.
I'm Rico Mariani. I'm an architect in the developer division, performance engineering team. I've been at Microsoft about 18 years, and in the computer industry maybe 7 years before that, part-time and whatever else, from embedded controllers to who knows what. From basically my beginning days, I think I was a performance guy, mainly because if you only have 192 bytes of memory to build something with, you kind of, got to know every one of those bytes on a first-name basis to get the job done. Nowadays, I have more than 192 megabytes, and I don't know any of them on a first-name basis, and maybe nobody else does either, and maybe that's part and parcel of the problem. Anyway, I'll pass it on.
Hi, I'm Terry Crowley. I'm currently the Director of Development for Office, and been at Microsoft for 10 and a half years, came over with the Front Page acquisition, and I was the dev manager for Front Page for about 7 years before moving through the rest of Office. And I've been building desktop applications for almost 25 years, starting out on some of the early 3M workstations, the 1 megapixel, 1 megabyte, 1 megahertz workstations. That was a custom workstation built by Bolt, Beranek, and Newman, where I worked for 10 and a half years. So I've been building desktop applications for a long time, and when you build them, you focus on performance, responsiveness, the interactive experience. And I actually, at BBN, if you don't know, was one of the developers of the internet, and so I was actually struggling with building responsive applications connected to the internet before there was an internet. Al Gore, actually, Al Gore was okay. He helped move things along. So anyway, I've been thinking about responsiveness and stuff for a long time.
My name is Brechner, and I'm with Engineering Excellence. I'm responsible for developer excellence at the company. And I've been here for about 11 years, and I've been thinking about performance issues since playing with the Trash 80 about 27 years ago, if any of you remember.
Whose first computer was the Trash 80?
Ooh, I was actually playing.
Half the room.
It wasn't my can't say it was my first, but it was the first that I really got into performance with, getting life to work really fast. Yes, it was very cool stuff. These days I worry more about human performance than I do computer performance in my current role. But obviously that has a lot to do with the success of the company in dealing with this area. And the very fact that it's so difficult and how do you find the stuff and all of that is very much a problem for me to help and my cohorts to help developers around the company. So hopefully we'll talk a bit about that and try and find good solutions.
Great. All right, thanks folks for coming. We're lucky to have such an august group here on a Friday afternoon, nice and sunny. All right, I'm going to start this off. Rico, the first question is for you. So we've shipped many successful products at Microsoft. What are the performance threats that we faced? What's the most important thing you knew about performance 20 years ago that's still relevant today?
And you want that answer in, what, 30 seconds or something?
Use the right amount of time.
Use the right amount of time. Okay. So, 2 to 3 minutes. 2 to 3 minutes for that question. So this is important now. I'm going to try to, while we're doing this, to be maybe a little bit even more hyperbole than I usually am, in the interest of giving my colleagues a chance to, yeah, it is, a chance to jump in and tell everyone else what an idiot I am. And I also would like you guys to jump in and say what an idiot I am, because that's the whole point. And you could wait. You can wait. So do jump in, okay? It's supposed to be kind of fun. So what's still relevant from 20? I'm going to start from the back. What's still relevant? 20 years ago, I used to write these little games and stuff, on a PET or on a Kim 1 or whatever. And I used to tell my friends the most important thing about writing any program is you got to have a plan. You got to have a plan. And now, as then, you still got to have a plan, even more so. So if you ask me what the threat is simply that the opportunity for blowing it is much greater now than it's ever been before. If you think about how much better you can make a program if it's, world-class performance compared to just sort of mediocre, Think about the greatest video games you've ever seen and their interactive response and how much, interactivity they get out of the same hardware as, say, or the running on the same hardware, rather, that, say, a productivity application uses. And you look at the productivity app and it, repaints the screen 8 times when you resize, and you're like, I get 2 million polygons a second or something running Doom, and, I got to look at this flicker, on my slideshows. So, that to me is kind of the biggest threat. We have unprecedented opportunity to blow it, and we have to be careful. There's lots of dimensions, too. There's the framework you use, there's, what runtime are you using, what tools are you using, lots to know, lots of opportunities to get it wrong.
I was reflecting on that just the other day. I was sitting at my desk. I was thinking. I'm sorry, Terry. I'm running Outlook 2007 Beta 2, and it's got a little bit in terms of perf. But I was waiting for it to come up, and I was thinking. When I got here 12 years ago, I had a machine that I was the envy of the folks. I was the latest guy in. Everyone else had 60 megahertz Pentiums, and I had a 90 megahertz, and it was Microsoft Mail at that point. I'm thinking, on that machine that had I don't know how much 32 megabytes of memory. And the 90 megahertz Pentium processor, the mail client fired up, I think, faster than what we've got today. And so it is a challenge in that we're not making smart use of the resources, I guess, in many ways. You got a comment?
I actually don't want to pick on Terry just yet. But yeah,
other people you can pick on.
It's definitely the case that things have changed. The amount of data that we actually try and interact with.
So you're going to pick on me?
No. The amount of data we try to interact with is much greater than it was. What year was that? 1900. Yeah. Anyway, and that's part of it too. And so controlling when we decide to do things is pretty important. So we talk a lot about controlling the what, when, where, and how things are done. So when we're starting Outlook, probably the most important thing is to get a good view of that subset of data that should be presented first, done. And so how can you prepare for the next launch of Outlook so that that information is what's shown, rather than doing a lot of potentially background expensive operations to ensure the database is this way, that way, or the other such thing from an integrity standpoint, which could be very expensive, important to do, but do they need to come first? So I think we need to look at what work needs to be done to get the user responsiveness at a certain level, or get the apps responsive to the user very quickly, and then defer and control when and how other things are done.
What are some examples of things that people ought to do to get the app more immediately responsive to a user?
Well, I mean, you take a look at what games do today, right? I mean, they have the illusion of responsiveness by putting up a splash screen, right? But I think for the most part, they should be endeavoring to program so that they're kind of poised to do the right next thing next. So at shutdown, you don't want to do lengthy preparation work so that launch is fast. But at the same time, in the background while you're running, you potentially get yourself in a situation where you can be consistent at the next startup. Now, you need to think of that as background activity. Don't be disruptive while you're doing that. But if you don't do anything, your startup could be impaired considerably.
So this comes back to Rico's point about piloting, because when you think about the feature, any new feature, or we need to think about, if you were asked this as a person, do this project, you say, when do I have to have it done? When should I start it? You think about, how it fits into your other priorities, and you plan what resources you needed and all that. When we do a feature that has to do a given amount of work, we need to be thinking about the same things. 3 of the big mistakes we made in Visual Studio near the end of Would-Be were things that we could have done in the idle loop and we were doing before the idle loop. The same kind of things you're talking about, right? We were checking the licenses, we were loading a news page, we were doing a lot of stuff. So So I think we need to plan our features better. We need to plan what resources they're going to use, when are we going to use them, when do they really need to be done.
So do you think? What about the infrastructure that supports that? I mean, and I don't think we pay enough attention to say that how do we build the infrastructure that allows people to do that right?
Right. Well, we don't right now insist on design, any design. So when I was teaching the performance class, one of the things people asked for is what's the top 10 mistakes on design, and I asked a lot of experts, like from each division, and I asked Rico, and he said there was no design, there was no design, there was no design. That's the top 10 reasons, But of course, we went into details on particular things. But here in Microsoft, you can deliver your product without ever going through design in many groups. Now, I've worked with MSN for a few years. I've dealt with other groups before that, and now I've been in developer division for a year and a half, and you can get away without doing design at all here.
And sometimes you don't ask about the dependencies and the things that you're using when you're developing things. You might design something but not ask the right set of questions. And
the other aspect is sometimes one thing is evaluating the software at beta 2 before we ship, because there is aspects to. I mean, clearly, Outlook.
You realize you set a bar for yourself.
Yeah, right. Really. I mean, one of the aspects of that Outlook has been fighting with, and actually, one of the Outlook devs gave a talk a couple weeks ago on how they've built in asynchrony and responsiveness and worked on that over the years, and what you saw you almost cried in seeing it, because that you saw how badly they were impacted by building on top of the initial MAPI layer at the beginning, which was, fundamentally, one of the mistakes Microsoft made in terms of betting on these synchronous LAN APIs. And Outlook sort of jumped on that initially, which led to a lot of sort of bad architecture through that. And they've been sort of correcting it over time, over releases, and fundamentally, have been working through that design to the point where, some of the issues that you're seeing in the betas, they have mechanisms internally to fix those problems. They're working through them. It is the case that they're fixing those architectural problems. They're struggling with another set of problems with some of the issues that we see, in the operating system with contention for resources, that they now have more things going on, and they find that, okay, they're asynchronous and backgrounded, but now they're contending for resources down below.
I'll ask a follow-up question on that, and it may be more for Michael, but Terry, you might have opinions too. What is the right balance of doing things in the idle loop versus not touching yourself too often, to use one of your more colorful phrases?
Whose
colorful phrases?
It's Mr. Fortin.
We often make fun of teams for basically writing software that constantly wants to keep active and touch its data and do things like that. What's the right balance? I mean, I think the system ought to have a framework in which people who want to write good citizen type software can just register. So when's an opportunity for me to do some background work and schedule to have that done, and then have that global policy kind of drive a lot of that. Now, that can't be universally correct for every operation, for every application, et cetera. But, we've got one of those in Vista finally that I think is approachable enough that we can kind of evangelize it on a large scale. That will help, but it won't be a universal type thing. I think every application needs to look at its own responsiveness and decide what's right for it. But also, the people that are writing those applications need to be aware of what else is going on in the system. They can't all act independent of one another. So a framework is necessary, but also you need to have an independent thought. We have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a comment. My name's Hazem Shafi, and I've been asked to introduce myself before asking the question or making the comment. So, and here I don't want everyone to do the same. So my name's Hazem Shafi. I'm in Dev Performance Engineering, and I have a question. You started by saying we've developed a lot of performant apps over the last 20 years. Over the last 20 years, a lot of things happened. Ignoring the hardware complexity aspect, I have a rule of thumb that says everything that we've done to make the programmer's life easier degrades performance. Do you guys agree with that notion? Or what do you think is the right balance of ease of programming and achieving good performance?
Reed Fox's quote, the path to least resistance is the path to worst performance.
You can
I
solve
tend
any
to
computer
agree.
science problem by adding a layer of indirection.
I don't know that that's always the case. So in the interest of disagreeing with the audience, okay, there are examples where we've made people's lives easier and they result in better performance. And I'm going to give the SQL team a nod here, okay? It has never been easier to manipulate multiple hundreds of megabytes of data in fairly complicated ways without ripping your hairs out and still get decent performance. Never been easier. We do stuff now that, even 10 years ago I wouldn't dream of doing, partly because the hardware has caught up, but also because we have a QP that knows all the usual kinds of tricks. And the same is true in a lot of other areas of tooling. Like if you look at the kinds of code that we can generate out of the native backends, and I don't think we're there on the managed backends yet, but I'd like to be there. But I think people don't reach for the assembler nearly the way that they used to, say, 15 years ago or 10 years ago, right? Nowadays, sometimes I have to reach for the assembler, but always it's because, I got to read some perf counter register, and how the heck am I supposed to abstract the heck out of that, or some other bizarre reason like that. It's not because the code is bad, and I need to second guess the code quality stuff. Now, I wanted to respond to something you said a while back there, and again, in the interest of hyperbole, right? I hate victims, okay? I hate victims. The thing that drives me the craziest is people who show up at Beta 2 and they say they have a perf problem, and it's like, and when I was on the CLR, it was the CLR. But it doesn't matter. Pick your technology, okay? I'll use the CLR. Oh, we're slow because the CLR sucks. Okay, so what? It didn't suck at Beta 1? This is a new suckage. It happened last week. Or it didn't suck at the start. Oh, those OS locks, they weren't there in Windows XP when we started development in Office. So that's why we didn't know anything about them. Generally, the victim situation is, I didn't plan, so therefore I will blame, okay? And it's not productive. So you don't want to be in a situation where you have to go and whine about MAPI, okay, at Beta 2 and talk about your legacy. You want to be in a situation where you can predict those things, right? Okay, now still sometimes we get blindsided, right?
Yeah, well,
we get blindsided.
This should be interesting.
I was hoping I wasn't going to have to defend the Outlook team here, since I'm pissed off too. But I want to beat up on the MAPI folks. Actually, getting back to your thing about making programmers' lives easier, I've been beating this drum about the issue between synchronous and asynchronous APIs, and I've heard a lot of people claim that we simply don't know how to program to asynchronous APIs, and that's why all these APIs are synchronous, and it doesn't matter that when you build on these synchronous APIs, you build crappy applications that lock up and whatever, because if you built on top of asynchronous ones, they wouldn't work at all, right? which is just crap. It's junk. And you build up the mechanisms that you need to be able to structure your application. And if you have to build on top of asynchronous interfaces like TCP/IP and people building on top of SMTP and POP directly, when Outlook Express knows that it's building on top of an asynchronous protocol, it deals with it. It puts the infrastructure in place to do it. You start, and a lot of places we build on top of these synchronous APIs. And you can say, you should know, you don't call create file on the main UI thread. And you're right, we should know that. And we should do a better job, and we need to do a lot of work to fix that. But fundamentally, there's screw-ups at the bottom layer. I mean, the fact that Vista is the first version of Windows that has cancelable, I/O is just incredible, is amazing to me. And the fact that it's great that it's cancelable, but there's now, there's all the other layers above it which aren't cancelable because we have no general mechanism for canceling. And cancellation is just completely fundamental to building responsive applications. The user changes their mind all the time, and we don't want the app going off and continuing to do all this work while the user wants to do something else.
The red X was up there. Isn't that the big cancel?
Yeah, it's the big cancel button, but we just zombie threads, and the work's still going on because we can't cancel the operation.
Go ahead, Amnon.
So I'm Amnon Horowitz. I'm the engineering excellence guy for developer division. So one thing that strikes me in all the observations here is that a lot of this is about planning. It's about wanting to do things right. It's about wanting to do things well. Do you see any connection between our kind of culture of instant gratification, agile methods, just get it out there quickly, blah, 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 has anything to do with the type of challenges we're facing today?
I'll be happy to respond to that. But of course, Amnon knows what I'm going to say. I just love the whole notion of the extreme engineering, and some people they take this extreme engineering to mean don't engineer, right? It's funny because no other engineering discipline could possibly get away with the crap we get away with, right? It's just, I'm building this building with extreme civil engineering. Going to put down the first floor. Don't know how tall it's going to be. Get that first floor down though, because I need people walking in the door right away. Got to start collecting rent.
So we're going to refactor.
And then we'll, what? Now, we have a fungible substrate, right? So we can do miracles sometimes, but so it would be stupid to not take advantage of the fact that we do have a fungible substrate and we can make some changes. But you should have a frickin' plan. Extreme engineering doesn't mean let's blindly go start using whatever stupid thing is convenient because IntelliSense says I can type it in. Now people have convinced it's lexically valid to call this API in this context with its intelligent to do so, right? Just because you can create an XML document in the middle of your string hashing function doesn't mean that it's prudent to do so. And it's only 23
right
characters.
Behind the die.
Yeah, well, it's right. It is. Using the system, you don't have to type anything. So we reduce the friction. We have all over the place, right? And we do in the OS as well. In a bunch of places, you get access to all kinds of stuff that it's just not a very smart idea to call it. Just because you can.
So I'm gonna jump in and ask director question, Eric. How much of this is an education problem? You knew you were
There
going to
are
get
lots.
this, so.
Yeah, I knew it was coming. That was the short version of that. So there's a short and long answer to that. It's not an education problem. That isn't to say that there's lots of education that doesn't need to happen. There is, and in fact, Rico and Gerardo and other folks are helping us actually come up with that education. But it's not an education problem. There are a lot of things that drive people to have certain behaviors that you're talking about just going ahead and jumping in and calling whatever and getting that ground floor built before you even think about the rest. There are lots of things that drive that behavior, and education is one of the least. Just because you know how to do something doesn't mean that you're going to do it. The most influential is just having the expectation for you to think in advance, for you to plan it out, and to have managers enforce that. Have the expectation that it's going to perform well, and then have measures in place to be able to tell whether or not it is or it isn't, and having those available from the beginning so that you don't get blindsided at the end. Because very often that's the case, right? You're messing around, you're coding it, you got your big frickin' box that has nothing else running on it, because nothing else will run on it, because it's your development box, and everything's copacetic, right? And it's not until later on that you actually realize that there's a problem, and that's because you don't have any feedback mechanism to tell you when you're not actually hitting what you're expected to hit. Yeah, and those very simple things of setting the right expectations and having feedback to know whether or not you're hitting them is far more influential and far more important than something like education. I don't want to downplay the education. I like my job. It's just that that's far more important. Having the right tools in place is just as important as well. And in this case, obviously, there's a tremendous variety of different performance problems in different areas. You can't have the same tools solve everything for everybody. But one of the most basic tools that people don't use is something to just measure how your performance is every build. Right? Every time you run a build, you know, did things go better, or did things go worse, or what? Right? And having that kind of thing in place is hugely impactful.
Plan and measure.
Yeah, plan and measure and iterate, and we do have that nice fungible substrate. We can make adjustments, right? But only if we know to, right? Only if we're aware of it. And if you make, if there's any bit of advice that I can give everyone, I know Rico would agree, if there's any bit of advice that I can give anyone, it's measure the silly thing, make it transparent to everyone exactly what the performance is, and then, hold people accountable to that. And you'll get the rest of it. Then all of a sudden people will care about it and they will want to think about it in advance, and it generally drives itself.
Go ahead, Larry.
Actually, before we get to the question, so it's education problem. It's an accountability problem first. I think that's the key thing. Behind every bomb, from a performance perspective, is an architect somewhere who thought that was the right thing to go build. And in some cases, they were measuring systematically. They were just measuring the wrong thing in the wrong way and didn't know it. And oftentimes, they made decisions early on that they can't find a way out of later on. Now, if it was a security issue that the decision was based on, and it was going to be manifesting itself problematically from a security perspective in the marketplace, they'd reverse course. But with performance, they tend to think they don't have to give ground, they don't have to rethink those fundamental things, and they go down this path even further and further, digging a deeper hole to the point where eventually you have to throw it out and replace it with something else. I think accountability is the most important thing that we need to establish. I think if teams understood that this will be treated as severely to turn this thing into a disaster from a performance perspective as it would be a security perspective, I think we would have better results at the end of the day. And people do not hold their senior architects accountable for performance disasters like they do other things. So we just have to fix that.
We worked very hard, and I know that
passing the mic.
We worked very hard. To make sure, one of the things that also drives behavior is, am I going to get promoted? Am I going to get a raise? Am I going to get a bonus? Right? We worked very hard in the career models to make sure the performance was front and center. And I did a little search on it across a whole bunch of different career stage profiles for developers, and it's just all over the place. And only in one spot is actual human performance. It's all about making sure that the design is right, making sure the implementation is right, making sure you're checking it throughout, you're thinking about it, you're designing for it, along with other quality measures as well, not just performance. But it's right there, and 'tis the season to be thinking about this kind of thing. This is a great opportunity for you to message that. This is, the first real review that you can hold people accountable to these career models. It's time for people to start doing that.
Great. We'll go to Larry.
So I'm Larry Sullivan. I'm the group manager for performance, among other things, in the CLR. I'm going to backtrack just a second to the tools question a little bit, and kind of goes to a little bit of this, though. And that is, we're talking a lot about what people inside the company are going to do. And I've been thinking a lot in my time about how we provide things so our developer customers build performant applications on top of, well, in my case, the CLR, but other things. And one of the things that is interesting, especially if you take managed code, is it's very easy because of the tools we provide to draw a frame and throw everything on that frame so that it all happens at startup. Lovely. Makes our startup time look really spectacular when we're going out and we're actually negotiating the auto proxy configuration when we're trying to draw the main frame. I mean, genius. Yeah, we're going to look a little slow there when we spend seconds trying to get that thing to happen. And so I think we have another part to this threat, which is we need to be thinking about the tools we're building, the instructions we're giving to customers, and then how they're going to interact with those tools when they're building their applications, so we don't drive them into places where the easy way to do it, or the way that we're asking people to do it, or showing them to do it, leads them down the primrose path to start with.
You want to talk about the pit of success?
I mean, just a couple things to that. One is, examples of Office extensibility. I mean, essentially, we have all these events that you can write code, and it's just, random person, third-party code, and it puts our responsiveness and performance in the hands of these people that maybe have a community college degree, maybe have a computer science degree, but not likely. And it's there. I mean, we've put our performance and our responsiveness, the user experience of Office, in the hands of these third-party people, and we have to think about what types of extensibility we want that doesn't do that doesn't put our performance in their hands, because frankly they're not going to take it as strongly as we will. So that's.
When we were talking about accountability earlier, I had an interesting conversation with Soma a few weeks ago, and I said, Soma, what do I have to do to make it so that if the Visual Studio startup time is slower on the next release, you get paid less? Because until I do that, I don't see it happening. And I think it's, Soma's my senior VP, but in a very real way, until it's like hitting people right where it hurts, they don't take it seriously. They think, I got to have the features, I got to, whatever, I'm 15% over budget on perf, yeah, whatever, I'll eat it. I got to have this, whatever, I got to have this shiny, whatever.
Actually, they'll move the goal.
Or they'll move the goal. But at the end of the day, right? At the end of the day, it's not there because they're not hardcore about it.
Bruce?
We have questions. Yeah, Bruce Worthington, Windows Server Performance. Don't want to beat a dead horse here, but I hear measurability, I hear accountability, I hear now is the season, and I hear dollars per. Thank you. Pay for performance, not pay for oil. I've been hearing that for many, many years. You guys have heard that for many. Talk is cheap. We just had a meeting recently, all the server performance team leads, and I'm not going to give names, and I'm not going to talk about specific groups, but when you go around the circle and say, are the teams you're working with putting performance into their goals? No, absolutely not. There is no performance goal anywhere in sight. Well, isn't that important? Of course it's important, but they're not going to sign on the dotted line for something that they can't control, because functionality, reliability, all this other stuff, they got to have that. Performance is their steam valve out. It's like we can get by without that. I'm not just ranting here either. This just happened. It happened last year. It happened the year before, ad infinitum.
That's a great point. I mean, and entropy happens in code, right? And you really have to work at it. One of the things that we have an engineering process change in SQL, and just interesting to share with you, we have this ranked improvement list now. We're supposed to work things in priority order. And just yesterday, as we went through the list, there was a discussion around a performance item. And it was to measure the optimizer to know whether we have regressed any plans before we implement any features in the optimizer that might result in different plans. And it was interesting to see the dialogue, and everyone at this stage said, yes, it's absolutely the right thing to do. They're going to invest in the framework to make sure that we haven't done that. Other things we have actually put into the plan, we're going to go after 10% here, 15% here up front, rather than wait until we're 30% behind and then try to grab it all back. Now, so our intentions right now are very good, and we'll see if we can stick to that execution plan. But you're absolutely right. Unless you plan for it up front, it just naturally goes in the wrong direction. And accountability is something that, in many dimensions, we have not yet sort of wrestled to the ground, I guess.
Go ahead, Jerry.
One other thing is so I took over this position in December. I'm not going to say whatever, but we are in the process of thinking through the organization for the next version of Office. And one of the things that as I'm talking through this is I'm saying is putting together a larger performance team that's not simply driving knowledge and some tools and some process, but rather is doing big significant things, and saying that every single team has to have a certain number of performance features and performance devs up to, so we're talking 15, 20% of the overall development organization specifically dedicated for performance. Now, you can hold me accountable for actually delivering on that and convincing the rest of the organization that that is the right amount of to invest in that. But that's what I'm pushing for. And
that's kind of the
well,
bottom line. Right now we're lining up
right. Yeah. Okay. That's
which senior leaders
yeah.
have specific commitments around performance. And when I look at my management chain, I believe it stops with my immediate boss. And after that, there aren't any.
Right.
And then I suppose if I go off and work with guys in, I'll just pick different buildings around that things are in, I'm not going to find any. And like that change has to happen.
I think the other aspect is around, what is your vision for what you want to accomplish? Is it, damn it, I'm going to hold the line this time? And it's like, well, holding the line sucks. I mean, it does. I mean, it's not good enough. And so, you look at something, I'll pick some of our competitor apps as an example, just because they hit me hard in terms of, but, look at Google Maps, no more processing required, no extra, CPUs, a completely different interactive responsive experience to the typical MapQuest or other map systems that were click, click, click. Instead, it's a completely interactive experience. It's a completely different experience, responsive experience, in using those internet map applications. Now, our map system does a similar thing now. That's great. But that's an example where you have a vision for what the experience is going to be like. Another example is the Picasa image editing tool. It's using DirectX for all its rendering. If you've tried it, you start it, 1, 2, 3, boom, it's up. UI painted, everything there, your 1,000 images, you scroll through, it's a video game. It's like playing a video game. It's a great experience. So you have to have a vision for what you want to accomplish, and it's not, I'm going to hold the line this time, damn it. It has to be something else. It has to be more than that. The hardware is getting better. The hardware is there. The GPU is there. As you said, it's there. You can play these games, and it's great. And we need to do a better job, and we need to have a better vision for what we want to accomplish.
Isn't the key on the vision connecting, in just a second, Richard, connecting what customers want out of a product to where you spend your performance efforts?
It's definitely thinking about what customers want. It's also saying, recognizing the value they're going to see in that. And maybe I'm reading too much in terms of what I love, but I would rather be using a Ferrari than using a Yugo, there. And
those are quantum changes
Mike.
in how you think about the problem. They weren't shaving instructions and cycles and doing that. So I mean, that's a very, in some cases, a very hard thing to do with the legacy that we have. So we're wrestling with that right now in terms of re-architecting, because we're just falling farther and farther out of the cache. And we know we can get our head around what we need to do to fundamentally change things, but can we actually make the change in the code and keep the product doing the same thing it does today, just performing it 3 to 4 times the response?
And that's the threat.
Let's have Eric make a comment, and then I'll go to Richard for a question.
The key point I don't want lost from what Terry was just talking about is, the old Microsoft culture, meaning the existing one, is to think about the feature first, right? Do the cool thing. You've got your own little product unit. You're going to decide what you're going to do. You have these cool features that you want to accomplish. You accomplish those features, great. But what Terry was talking about was a different take on it, which is instead of thinking about the feature, think about the experience, right? Forget about your particular product group, your particular team, your particular area. Think more about it from the customer's perspective. What would be an outstanding experience for what we can deliver? And then when you think about the outstanding experience, you're naturally going to be thinking about the performance of that experience.
At the right level. Richard?
My name is Richard Russell. I'm on the Windows Client Performance team, and you guys have talked about a couple of really interesting aspects of how to solve some of the performance problems, but I think there's 2 others that I've seen in Windows. One of them is organizational, and the other one is kind of a priority thing. In other words, where performance often isn't a top priority. It may be an important goal, but it's not a high priority. The other one is organizational, where not all groups, but many of the groups throughout Windows, and I don't know how it is in Office or in DevDiv, but the people responsible for perf are not feature devs. They're testers. And they have a lot less influence over the organization as a whole for many reasons. One of them is they typically come into the process late. How do you guys see things changing organizationally and from a priority perspective in Windows and in the other groups to help address some of these performance issues?
You want me to take it, or do you want to take it? Maybe you should take it.
I have no clue.
Okay, well,
That's direct.
Oh, we have new management coming into Windows. I have no clue how this is going to be.
what are we going to tell? What are you going to tell Steve?
Well, I'm going to tell him that accountability is a very important thing, that commitments need to be set not just on people's jobs who have performance in the title, but actually as you go up. And so if somebody who's basically a general manager in charge of a handful of key deliverables, that they ought to have commitments around performance that we agree are the right set of ones that they should have. And they should then, of course, because commitments are supposedly important, be publicly reflected on their little website, and we should be able to go to it and hold these guys accountable. That's what I would hope to see. I do not know whether that's going to come through or not, that we got new management coming in.
So let me see if I got this straight. We're going to tell Steve Sinofsky, okay, the old management, they weren't accountable, but now that you're here, we're going to start holding you accountable because we think you're a pushover compared to the other guys, and he's going to go for that.
I'm expecting Steve to hold the people that report to him accountable for their commitments, and I would like to see their commitments to be reflective of the performance goals for the overall product. If we can't do that, then performance doesn't matter.
I think you're right. It's the whole quality thing. Yeah, I don't disagree, right? I'm pulling your chain, but like we're asking for a little bit of accountability. It's not just that. We're asking for like a martyr, not a martyr, a messiah. Messiah. Like we're going to have the messiah of perf show up and say, "Oh yes, now that I'm in charge, we're going to have a new religion, and it's going to trickle down, and the people will come to us and do." Is that the answer? A messiah?
No, it's not messiah. It's organization. The organization needs a change. The organization is about to have a change. If I were asked what I would ask for accountability and visibility into that accountability. And that means this commitment system, let's use it appropriately. We had a bunch of date milestones in Vista, and we've had numerous ones in the past. And people would meet those dates, check in code that clearly was unacceptable by anybody's standards. Not just from a performance standpoint, but from other ones. But they got their bugs closed. God knows they did it. They checked in the code, and it was disastrous. It wasn't just performance. And you look at that and you say, well, that team's continuing to do business. Why isn't the feature pulled from the product? And what accountability is there for these people for having done that? And then, of course, other teams had to marshal resources to rescue their butts. That's a very problematic thing to happen in an organization that's trying to develop software along a certain set of quality guidelines as well as release milestones that are constrained. When that happens, we should expect some amount of accountability, and I have no visibility into any accountability at this point for a lot of those people.
Maybe
I would like that
new
to change.
management.
We do have new management, and so the ask of the new management is, let's get people accountable for things, performance teams included.
You can't hold people accountable to things that aren't transparent, right? Because it's already too late, and now you just have to send in the troops and fix it and stuff, and then it's too late. You have to make it transparent from the beginning, both what the repercussions are, you can't check in, right, and whether or not you've hit the bar, right? Those things have to be transparent, the rules behind it and whether or not you've met them. And to the extent that that isn't transparent, it's not going to happen.
Okay. Cameron, go ahead.
So I'll just point out something. Like Rico, I hate victims, and I'll just point out there's a group of influential people here, 2 technical fellows here, and I argue that if the group here, the group of people here, tells their management what their expectation is as a kind of uniform body around how these things should be handled and what do they expect to see in their commitments, I think change will happen. And so I'll just point out it's an opportunity for us to make a difference.
I wanted to talk too. Here, I've said enough.
You realize statistically being in the middle has a slight advantage here.
He strategically selected that chair, I'm sure.
I guess I just want to share something, a 10-second thing. For me, sitting up here, I'm really surprised at the way the conversation is going. It's about people performance, which is fine, because I think that's where it all starts. And I think that represents sort of the will, and where is the accountability, and what are we going to do? Because I think the thing I'm feeling is that if you look at the people in this room, it's amazing how much expertise there is around performance. And I think it's just a frustration in that everyone here, I think, knows. I would imagine that everyone in this room, if you were to ask them, if you could control the horizontal and vertical, could you get 50% additional performance out of your space? Everyone would raise their hand. And there's other things in that. But it's just striking contrast because I expected it to be a discussion around trends in processors and cache and this and that, and it is amazing, and it does go back to, we really do have to make some fundamental changes just in our organization.
There's clearly a lot of hunger for that. Yeah. Pass it down to Eric, and then I'm going to see another question.
One thing, and this was brought up earlier, but I want to state it as one clear statement, is saying that Soma or whoever it happens to be, if it's Stephen or whoever, you're accountable for performance. They will almost certainly reject it. And the reason is that they're worried about a lot of things, not just performance. You say, well, those, performance is really important. Well, so are the other things. What people have to be accountable for is what the overall experience is going to be, right? Are we hitting our targets? Did we think through what value we were going to deliver? And that change is happening at the company at those levels. And they are held accountable to thinking through what value they're going to deliver. Now, are we doing the things that we have to do to execute to actually provide that value? And one of the pieces of that, one of the measures of that, has to be the performance. If you leave it out at the beginning, if you do not tie it to being successful at delivering the experience that's going to differentiate our products and get people to actually upgrade or buy or whatever it happens to be, then Steven Snovsky or whoever it is going to have a real problem. They have to meet that standard, and that's the bar that you hold them to. Not, is performance important to you? Of course it's important to me. Lots of things are important to me. My kids are important to me. My home life's important to me. Yeah, lots of things are important. Are you delivering customer value? Is that value going to be realizable by our customers? Yes or no? And part of that is performance, and it's an intrinsic part of it, and one that you have to be measuring from the start so that it's not acceptable to do anything but deliver it.
Okay. Over in the yellow shirt.
Actually, Eric said almost exactly what I was going to say. So the thing I sort of wanted to underscore is that there are a lot of things that are important, and you can't say performance, and I'm a performance guy, I love it, but you can't say it's more important than security or reliability, because in a way it's not. What it's more important than is a lousy, unperformant, feature experience that is still technically correct, right? That you have to see it as the essence of the feature experience, and if you don't, then you're guaranteed to misprioritize it, because it can't be above reliability and security.
It's one of many things that matters a lot. Okay. Actually, we'll do these two questions. First the blue striped shirt, and then Gunnar. So, Jim, if you give it.
Hi, I'm Ben Zorn from Microsoft Research. So, the question I had was it's really about the future. So it's really shifting gears now. So I believe that we are at a sort of a critical time in terms of performance with respect to multi-core. I think you probably all agree that there's some impact in terms of processor technology. So the question I have is about tools. The first part of it is, do we have the right tools now? Are we investing at the right level in tools? And so are we at the right point in the space, given what we've seen before? And considering that the space is changing fairly dramatically in the next few years, do we need to up the investment for the new world?
You grabbed one of our seed questions. Why don't we go to Rico and Dave? One of you guys want to handle that one?
You want me to start? Okay. You almost never overinvest in tools. So here's the thing. Where we are now, where we are now. Okay. There's gaps in the tools that we ship, but the kinds of tools that we're targeting are ones that you can use to diagnose single or maybe even dual proc kinds of systems, okay? And assuming that we did the journeyman work that was be necessary to get this generation of tools to fruition, you could imagine taking those tools and diagnosing a wide variety of single CPU kinds of problems. Now here's the thing: the moment you go multi-core or many-core, okay, I don't think the programming model holds water. And in the same way that I do not use a CPU profiler to solve my SQL Server problems. I don't. I look at the query plan and I say, well, what was its estimated query plan? What happened? Did it hit the indexes I was expecting it to hit? Do I not? I'm up a level of abstraction. Now, for me to tell you what tools I need to do performance analysis in the multi-core, many-core world, I have to know what the programming model is. And what I have to be able to do is understand how the threads are being scheduled, what decisions are the scheduler making, what are the knobs that it turns, how does it reason over those things. what affects those choices, and then I need to have some observability into those things. Because I'll tell you what, if I have to look at cache evictions across 6 processors, okay, that's not happening. You know, you'll notice even today.
I actually think part of what Ben was talking about is the fact that CPUs aren't getting faster anymore. So that pretty much means that the historical treadmill that we've been on, where Intel ships faster processors, it doesn't matter their apps got a little slower, is broken down. We're totally screwed if our apps continue to get 10% slower, because in 5 years, if it's 10% slower a year, it's 50% slower, unless you figure out how to use the multi-core, which, well, that's an open question.
Okay, so, but his question was about what tools are we building, right? And so my answer is, I can't really tell you what tools I need to build until I understand what programming model I want to expose.
What you want to know about the threads, right? So somebody can build that right now.
Maybe, but I don't know what the scheduling model is. Yeah, what?
No, it's independent. You just said that there are things that you could know that you would, if tool exposed them to you, it would help you understand above the layer of the cache, right? I completely agree, and we can build those tools right now. Right? We don't know how we're going to use them, but we should at least start investing in them.
Well, okay, I think it's fair to say that we are starting to invest in them, but the reason that the SQL plan works as well as it does as a diagnostic tool is because I can correlate it to the question that I asked. I can take the input, it was a SQL statement, I can say, okay, I got 5 joins, 3 tables, blah, 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 and I can look and see, okay, well, what join plan did it pick? What order is it doing these in? Which join type? Did it do some commutativity, whatever? I can see how the one went to the other. Now, even if I stand here and I say to you, okay, well, ultimately, all we can do, they're processors now, they're processors before, they behave the same way, so I can schedule them, I can preempt them, I can, whatever. So I take those metrics and I display them in some interesting kind of graphical sort of way. Unless I had some way of correlating that to the problem, as I handed it to the system, right? The equivalent of the SQL statement in my analogy, okay? And I could say, okay, this cost corresponds to this part of my verb. This cost corresponds to this part of my verb. If I flipped it, okay,
I'll just take it. It is, in my opinion, there's a couple of things that are very, very challenging here. One, and we all have to recognize that we are smarter than the average bear, the people in this room, right? And to see people, I don't know how we are going to present programming models and tools for mere mortals to be able to, make use of all this unless we completely revamp, how people think about the problem. Things have to be refactored. And for me, just thinking about which workloads can inherently be partitioned such that even the smart people can figure out how to get them to run on these many core machines is going to be a challenge. But figuring out how to present that for mere mortals to exploit, I think is going to be very, very difficult.
I think that's the problem.
I would say your question, do we need tools? I think absolutely. The answer is clearly yes. The question of whether we know what to build quite yet or not is unclear. The one other thing I point out is a lot of times if you look at computing and the infrastructure we build and the tools we build, a lot of what we try to do is abstract things to make it easier for the programmer to work. And so, like for one example, is we abstract away the processor cache. We say you've got a gigabyte of memory, you've got 2 gigabytes of memory. Go at it, and yet you might only have a half meg, 2 meg of cache, and you could be just killing yourself on cache misses, and it's hard to measure that. It's hard to diagnose that, and we're not thinking about it. And most programmers, I couldn't find maybe 3 programmers in Office, and this is some of the best programmers on the planet who are worrying about this, and yet you fundamentally you got to believe that that's having a huge impact on overall performance.
On this specific problem space, I'd encourage you to look at the quest that David Callahan put together on multi-core and many-core to ensure that it captures the problem space effectively. It's clearly significant the company needs to do, so please get us feedback about that.
And the next discussion is about multi-core.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah, Dave Berg, excuse me, DevDiv Performance Engineering. And I think we got into it a little bit, but one of the things that Rico started out with that tool discussion was he wasn't sure we had the right programming model. And it seems to me that when we really talk about tools, the programming model is one of the most fundamental tools that we have to work with, and yet we don't have the right programming model. We talked about asynchronous APIs and such. Well, we don't have a good programming model for dealing with asynchronous APIs. It's a ton of work compared to a synchronous API. And until we can make it easier for people to write good asynchronous, good multi-threading code than it is to write poor, synchronous code, they're going to continue to write the poor synchronous code. End of story.
So making it easier could actually help performance, to the question from earlier in the discussion.
So you could, Rico mentioned SQL, but the other one, just real quickly, is you can imagine Excel. It's a way of expressing a problem, and then underneath the covers, it's easy for us to imagine how we could partition and make the calc engine run and exploit many cores. But for people down writing, linear code, and there are a lot, we're going to have to do a lot in the program model to figure out how they can factor things and actually pull that off, even if we do change the model.
Go ahead, David, while the mic's being passed.
Just a simple question. Since I think I misunderstood Ben's question, do we, excluding many-core, multi-core, do we have the right set of tools even for a sequential processor? No. I know the answer.
The answer is no.
It's a straw man question.
Well, I think there's more than just tools that need to be asked. I mean, so first of all, let's not rat hole too much on tools. Tools are very important. We need lots of them. We need people building tools. We need people who are doing performance building tools, not just tools groups who don't do performance analysis, right? And then we need a bunch of people that are focusing on tools for end user, I shouldn't say end users, but the naive programmer, the one who's not going to spend a lot of time figuring out how to super optimize their code, but could spend a little bit of time figuring out how to avoid certain common pitfalls. But I think in general, the tools work that we see within Microsoft is largely unorganized, being done by a bunch of different groups here and there. And it would be in everyone's best interest if it was sort of a focused, centralized team that kind of said what's available, how do we make it well documented, and how do we actually make sure, and Toolbox doesn't fit the bill there, right? And how do we go off and work with teams to see how they're using them in an effective way, and what mistakes are still being made even though they're using tools.
So what group of people should tackle that?
Well, I think the organizational question, I mean, I think a performance team in general should be somewhere closely aligned with whatever team is doing it, and not a team that's just building tools.
I'd hypothesize that the people are in this room right now.
They probably are in this room. They probably are.
I mean this group. Go ahead, Gunnar, in the back.
I want to bring the discussion back to the earlier point about, so what can we do about accountability? I agree with Eric that we will likely not see our execs having goals around performance in their reviews and things like that. On the simple premise that we actually don't compete around performance in our businesses most of the time. Yeah, Dave, you might be a different, the slight exception there. But we only compete around performance when there is a benchmark, like in SQL, or when it is so bad that we clearly can't ship it, and that rarely happens, right? We sort of seem to get to just barely good enough. Or, as Terry mentioned, if a competitor comes along who really does this so much better that we are forced to actually respond to something. So
sometimes we do compete when we have better performance than them, and we go off and keep pushing them.
If you say so, I don't think that a significant percentage of the business that our execs care about is won that way. So, but the alternate approach to that is then, what about not shipping until the performance is to the levels that we promised? I mean, at some point, every team sets out and sets certain performance goals, and these are then retracted along the way, just like feature lists are. But rarely is there a strong line in the ground, in the sand, where somebody says, you know what, we're still 8 months away, we are holding to this target level of performance, and so what about pushing these things into our management and saying, listen, just like we have mandatory must-have feature sets, we have a mandatory must-have performance level.
Did you just say why we don't do that?
Yeah. We can retreat, but I don't even see enough of that, right? I mean, there's not, here's what we like to have, and here's what's clearly good enough, and let's make sure we meet the good enough. My observation is that when it's come time to ship, that we throw it all out. I mean, if it doesn't suck, we will ship it.
So the commitment to people trying to hit that performance bar, isn't that the wrong place to do it at the end, as a stop ship? Because that guarantees you're going to have that mark at the end to resolve the performance issues. I mean, you really have to say never get and then the decision is, well, but I have to ship it because I have these other reasons why I need to do it, so I have to do it. So it has to be part of the development process that as you're coding new features, you need to think about performance as a feature that you schedule for ahead of time if the existing product doesn't have the right performance. And B, whenever you're implementing a new feature, that before it gets checked in, it needs to be measured.
Let's give Michael 60 seconds, and Eric will get a chance.
I'll do it in less than that. I mean, it really has to start early on. I don't need to see a goal in Steven Stanofsky's commitments around performance. I need him to commit to ensure that the right people who are building the most important things for the feature set, as well as some of the lesser important things, have goals and commitments around performance. It's about what the organization's commitment is, and those commitments include upfront planning and systematic measurement. I mean, it has to be done early and throughout the cycle. Eric?
One of the concepts I think that you're looking for there is a concept called critical to quality metrics. And there's no golden fix for anything, of course. But the idea of a critical to quality metric is you talk to your customers, you understand, again, what value you're trying to deliver in this release, why are you doing those features in the first place, and then what you try and get out of that discussion is what are the things that are absolutely critical to quality? What are the measures that we can make that it's not acceptable if it takes this long to get a dial tone? It's not acceptable if it takes this long, that the overall experience, there are ways of measuring that experience that are absolutely critical to those customers happen. You come up with those measures are often directly related to performance. And then you hold those throughout. So you never get anywhere close to shipping without having those well in line. Okay. And it's not something that we do, frankly. We do not identify. We identify all kinds of things that we're going to measure, mostly around the number of bugs that we have. But we don't measure things in terms of what metrics are we going to make sure that we hit. And these are things that that companies around the world typically use to make sure that they hit before they ship.
I'll take one question from Richard, and then I'm going to switch gears to another seated question. Go ahead, Richard.
Less a question, more of a statement. And I respectfully disagree with you. We compete on performance all the time. You look at all the articles about people that compete with us, the Google guys, the Star Office guys, the Macintoshes, Firefox, Opera. One of the very first things you read in the article is it's faster, it's snappier, it loads quicker, it's more responsive, it's not, and the criticisms against us are it's big, it's fat, it's slow, it's cumbersome. Bloatware. Absolutely, we're famous for it. And I think one of the reasons why we focus more on bug count. Did you get your feature in on time? Right? Did you get your code check-in done? Are you at ZBB? Is because, face it, those are trivially easy things to measure. Right? I load up Product Studio, gee, I'm at ZBB. Easy. Even something as simple as app startup can be a non-trivial exercise. I spent a lot of time working with the multimedia guys on perf. One of the hardest things we had to do was just come up, what are we going to measure? What are the metrics and how are we going to measure it? It was really, really hard. And I think people fall down on perf just because some of the fundamental things that are easy for from a metrics perspective from other things, are just really hard with perf.
Yeah. Thanks, Richard. Good points. All right, I'm going to cede a question to Terry here. So we ship products all over the software spectrum. What are some common and different software performance challenges between client and server apps? For example, is responsiveness just another aspect of performance, or do we need to think about it differently?
So I'm going to jump to responsiveness because that's actually my pet topic that I love to talk about. I'm sure lots of people here can talk about the issues between client and server and the differences there. When I think about responsiveness, one of the very interesting things about it in the performance area is there's this issue of the human perception. Human perception puts a very concrete bar there. So if you get under some whether it's a quarter of a second, a tenth of a second barrier, it appears instantaneous. And so when you're doing performance, you can be working on something, and if you can get under that and you can guarantee that you're under that, then you can say, wow, that's instantaneous, I can do it, on the same thread and whatever. If it's not, and if you can't guarantee it, you suddenly get into a completely different space where you have to say, I have to start getting much more interesting in the techniques and mechanisms that I use. So you have to say, what am I going to make asynchronous, where, so what is the user experience while that's not, that operation isn't complete because this is asynchronous? Or how am I going to chunk it? How am I going to chunk the pagination of a 300-page document so that in fact I can do a little bit, get that in front of the user quickly, and then do that? Or in Excel, how can I chunk recalc across a wide space and get the immediate thing there in front of it. And so when we're dealing with responsiveness, you often find that, okay, I need to take a different approach. And you find when we screw up, it's often when we aren't willing to invest in that additional work. And the obvious thing is when we do things like calling APIs that we do not know the performance of or can't guarantee the performance of, like create file on some file share, and we haven't done the work to make it asynchronous or put it in the background and think about the user experience there. So responsiveness, I think, is a very different thing because of its correlation with sort of the human.
In fact, even to the point where you might use more CPU cycles, for example, to get a better appearance of responsiveness.
I mean, just look at copying a file in the shell where we count. We try to do some work to determine how long it's going to take, so we can give you an accurate feedback along the way.
Great. Okay, I'm going to seed one more question. This one's a little bit selfish in a sense because it has to do with the areas that I'm working in right now. This is to Dave here. With the move to service-based applications running on commodity, high-price, performance ratio hardware, how should application developers be thinking about scaling out their server code versus scaling up their code?
Okay, that's a good one. Yeah. I guess the thing on this one is to kind of go meta in the sense that I think there's a lot, particularly for a lot of people, that we have to unlearn, right, and things that we've done traditionally for years and years and years that sort of don't make sense anymore. And in this space, it's about decoupling and being able. When we worked with SMPs, we reduced contention, but we had everything in symmetry. And how do we decouple things such that there are basically fewer and fewer rendezvous points, such that we can achieve, effectively free scaling without a lot of coordination. And that requires a whole different level of thought and thinking. In the SQL space, as you know, we're building a version of SQL for use, CloudDB, which is reducing a lot of the feature and functionality of SQL, getting rid of some of those things that actually imply coordination across them to achieve sort of this free scaling. And one other thing, there are a large number of sort of high-scale e-commerce sites, and you'd know the names, who have gone from monolithic database clusters. It was eBay who presented at a conference a while ago. They used to have everything in one monolithic database cluster. They had to partition their data and partition the application to move auctions such that they could actually host auctions over many, many machines, host user feedback in another tier. So it was very difficult for them to do the thinking to pull that apart. But once they had done that and decoupled it, they could pretty much achieve linear scaling. And then it's a matter of, it's not do I get 1.8, or so when I double the resources. It's more about, if you think the incremental hardware cost going to zero, can I achieve linear scaling? Maybe 1.5 is good enough as long as I can still throw $500, $600, $700 boxes at the problem. And that's kind of the way we're thinking about it now.
Go ahead.
My name is John Eldridge from the Windows Devices core team, feeding into Windows Mobile and such. One of the interesting things I see is that Watson has done a good job of catching these obvious crashes, exceptions that happen once our devices are deployed. Is anyone around the company doing interesting things with performance where, perf Watson, where perf, if something takes too long, where we can mark it happening in the field, it comes back as a failure?
So I think there's multiple efforts going on. There's obviously the perf Watson stuff that I'll let Terry talk about. I mean, inside of Vista, there's a kind of flight data recorder running all the time. And if something is slow, the shell's not responsive, the system doesn't boot fast, etc., it's actually dumped the disk, mined, some nuggets of information are actually put in the event log. Others are actually displayed on the perf CPL. But right now, we don't pump that stuff back to Microsoft automatically for additional diagnosis and analysis, and then send a fix out to the user or tell them what to do out of band. But I think we're clearly all going in that direction, right? I mean, we do swim it back, that's true, but we're not like in the loop with the customer saying, hey, we'll get back to you on what we found about your performance problem.
One of the great
but I mean, clearly we're going in that direction.
It seems like Watson gives good debugging information where Squim just kind of gives us a pulse of what's happening.
We need to have more than just Squim. Squim won't be sufficient.
Okay.
Vista told me which of my boot devices was being a pain in the butt. Something that I had wanted to know for like the last 2 years. So I think that's a fantastic step forward. Right. It's just a little thing, but it's incredible.
Eric Fox, who's here, his team built Perf Watson, which essentially and for the Office 12, one of the things we were investing in is responsiveness, and we were looking at our hang data, and of course the hang data is where you've really lost responsiveness, but in fact we in looking at that data, we find that in fact most of the time we're hanging on network I/O, and all those places where you're hanging so long that the user kills you is also cases where you're hiccuping and whatever. And so we decided we needed to have better data around when are those places where we're hiccuping rather than simply hanging completely. And so we built this system called Perf Watson, again building on top of the Watson infrastructure, which essentially has a separate thread that takes a call stack snapshot when it finds that the main UI thread is not pumping for some period of time. And then what we can do is just like Watson, you can correlate those call stacks and find where are the places where the application is not being responsive to the user, and then the individual app teams can then pursue those. And in some cases you find they're exactly where, many cases you find exactly where you think they'd be. You're doing, in file open, and we invested in fixing many of those cases. In other cases it's more surprising where calling some shell API that you didn't realize under the covers was doing network I/O.
Great. All right, so in the interest of planning and measuring and holding ourselves accountable, I'm gonna wind down with sort of the last section of the presentation today. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to prove their own commitment to performance and give us a one sentence without semicolons, kind of wrap up on what you felt today. So why don't we start over at the far end? I'll start with you, Eric.
I'll knock it down to one word: transparency. Being transparent is absolutely critical. That make sure that what your performance is transparent to everyone, what the expectations are transparent to everyone, and when it comes to the APIs that you're using, that how they perform is transparent to everyone. And we'll get a lot farther.
Great, thanks. There might have been a comma or two in there. Go ahead, Terry.
I'd say hardware advances and the networking infrastructure changes are going to make it possible to build a radically better, more responsive, immersive user experience. But as a company, we're going to need the vision and commitment to say that we want to deliver that to our users, and because it's not going to come cheaply. It's not going to come automatically.
Thank you.
We won't solve our performance problems by learning more about the Pentium's L2 cache replacement policy. We'll solve them by taking steps to make sure our people are doing the right things.
Yeah, I think the most important thing that we need to do is work on the peoples that are working on software so that they understand their responsibilities with respect to security, reliability, performance, etc. Encourage them to ask questions, not push them off when they do.
I guess that's thinking it through. It's about the system, but in some sense it's the development system, it's the people system and such like that. So that's, as I mentioned before, something that I had not expected to come through from everyone. We just sort of gravitated there, and so that's my takeaway to go back to the team. And do we have the processes in place? Do we have the people set up to succeed to make a difference from the outset? So.
Great, thank you. Hey, thanks to the panelists, and thanks especially to the audience for showing up late on a Friday to engage this very important topic for us. Gerardo?
I just want to close and without, I don't mean any disrespect to anyone, but I want to repeat what Bruce said. Talk is cheap, right? So the challenge is that you guys send us ideas, and we think about this all the time, but you guys send us ideas on how to get acting on some of the or all of the great ideas that we heard. Ideas are good. How to act on the ideas is what the key is about. And so I think the goal of this community to make it beyond fun time and nice talks and all that is to find ways to act, to find ways to align so we can lead. And so start talking and we'll find a way. Thanks for coming. Don't leave any food or beer before you go. Thanks.